Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links video. Today we're taking a look at the Lightning Voltcondor deck and trying to see if it's gotten any better, any worse after the introduction of the latest wave of support we got, which was the Mimi Aqua cards. Basically, this deck hasn't really changed that much. We've included a small Aqua package just because of the overall power of Seahorse Carrier being really high. Being able to easily summon out multiple high-level monsters is really good, and not having any restrictions on it is also really good. So I guess first we'll go and take a look at our skill, that being Lightning Shift. So this skill can only be used by Yuga Odo. This skill can be used if the only monsters with 1400 or more attack in your deck are Spellcasters or Winged Beasts. So notably, we can use 1300 and under, which means we can use things like Thunder the Thunder in this deck if we want to. It can be activated during the turn you have normal summoned a level 7 or higher monster, so it doesn't have to be a Winged Beast, it doesn't have to be specifically Lightning Voltcondor, just any level 7 or higher monster. One face-up monster on your opponent's field becomes Light attribute until the end of your turn. If you have a face-up Lightning Voltcondor on your field, you can add a level 4 or lower Light attribute Winged Beast type monster from your graveyard to your hand. Now this is very important because Lightning Voltcondor's effect requires us to discard a monster, so we're basically able to get back a Luminous Parrot, which we can then discard for the effect, or we can just summon out and use it as tribute fodder, so it's a skill that does have multiple uses. So Lightning Voltcondor itself is a bit of a middling boss monster. Level 7 2200 attack is very poor. We can send one monster from our hand to the graveyard. All face-up monsters on your opponent's field with the same attribute as the monster sent to the graveyard to meet the requirement lose attack and defense equal to the level of that monster sent to the graveyard times 300 till the end of this turn. So this card traditionally was terrible because you had to hope that the cards in your hand match the attribute of your opponent's monsters, and a lot of the time that would mean just trying to play all of the different attributes so you can discard and catch your opponent no matter what they're playing. The downside to that being a lot of the different attribute monsters weren't particularly good. But we can still kind of facilitate that gameplay because we are including the Spellcaster package, and Seven's Red Magician equally wants to have all the different attributes in the deck, which means we can actually facilitate that if we want, although we will not typically be doing that because using our skill we can make all of our opponent's monsters light, as well as the fact that most of the boss monsters we're seeing at the moment are light anyway. Things like Multi-Strike Dragon Dragius, things like Diankito the Cure Master, and Prima Gitana are all light monsters, and they all see quite a lot of play, meaning Lightning Voltcondor is live a lot of the time anyway, but we can also use Lightning Shift and our Luminous Parrot to make our opponent's monsters light so that we can discard and get a big turn off of that. So in actual fact, the best card to discard off Lightning Voltcondor is going to be a second copy of Lightning Voltcondor because it is a light monster with the highest level. So we can discard it as a level 7, and then 7 times 3 means we will be weakening all of our opponent's monsters by 2100, which means we can attack over all of them and get into our opponent for massive damage. Whereas if we were to discard a Luminous Parrot, that's only level 4, so 4 times 3 means it will only be losing 1200 life points, which is nowhere near as good, but still useful to beat over those troublesome 2500 attack monsters. So our other boss monsters in the deck, we have Darkness Crested Hawk. So if your opponent has a face-up light attribute monster on their field, send the top card of your deck to the graveyard. One face-up Winged Beast type monster on your field gains 1000 attack till the end of the turn. So you can use this on itself just to make it 3100, or what we can do is we can use it on our Lightning Voltcondor. And this doesn't make a huge difference, 31 versus 32 is not a ton. But what we can do to play around Phantom Bind is stack Darkness Crested Hawk effects, meaning that we can summon out 2 of these, use both of their effects on the same Darkness Crested Hawk, make it 4100, and then if our opponent does have a Phantom Bind and we do just have all of our Winged Beasts in our graveyard, we can play around that. Obviously this isn't going to come up very often unless we're against like a Blue Eyes, or we've gotten very unlucky and have all 6 of our other Winged Beasts in the graveyard, but this can come up sometimes. This is a little trick you can pull off. The other boss monster of the deck is Seven's Red Magician. So this card doesn't really need any introduction. We can send a card to the graveyard, gains attack equals the number of different attributes in the graveyard times 300. So again, we have all of the attributes, meaning this effect should be live a lot of the time, and we can easily get this guy up to 3900. So one big negative you're probably seeing is that all of our monsters have really low base attack, 21, 21, and 22. That means we never really want to be just summoning one of these guys on turn 1 and leaving it at that. And that is a bit of a problem because sometimes you will open multiple level 7s and just have to summon one out or else brick the following turn. And that is this deck's major weakness, is that on your opponent's turn when they're attacking into you, there's not really much you can do. You just kind of have to accept they're going to hit you, wait until they leave 3 monsters in attack mode, and then try and combo them out if you can. So that's one of the ways you have to play this deck, is you have to play it very, very defensively until your opponent goes aggressive. Now, this can be a bit of a problem, because if your opponent, for example, just waits until they get 2 copies of Multi-Strike Dragon Dragius, they could probably just kill you in 1 turn. And there's not really any counterplay to that type of play. If we go aggressive, we open up ourselves to just getting completely beaten up, at which point we won't really have any kind of counterplay to dealing with their counter-aggression. So this deck always has to kind of be like the riposte, the parry riposte. We have to wait until our opponent attacks into us, and then we can counter-attack, and that's where this deck really gets its fangs out and gets to really try and rip into your opponent. So if we go through our other cards, we do have Seahorse Carrier. Now, obviously, we've already spoken about this card, but during the turn you normal summon this card, add a light attribute Aqua-type normal monster from your graveyard to your hand, which means our target is always going to be Grace Princess Kana. The reason we've gone for Kana is because we cannot include Kanan, because it is a 1400 that is not a Spellcaster or a Winged Beast, which means our Lightning Shift skill would not work. And we didn't really want to use Lamoon. A 1400 defense in Kana is fine for this. It's not necessarily the best card, but this deck is quite a defensive deck, and having multiple 1400 defenders can catch your opponent off guard, or make it so your opponent cannot clear your entire board unless they're specifically on a lot of 1500 attack monsters or something like the aggro builds. Next up, Luminous Parrot. If your opponent has 2 or more face-up monsters on the field, turn the top card of your deck to graveyard. The attribute of 1 face-up monster on your opponent's field becomes light. Obviously, this is here to facilitate our boss monster's effects. Works really well with our skill as well, because this way we can change 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 of our opponent's monsters to light to get maximum benefit from our Lightning Voltcondor. Next up, we do a Fire Golem. We can pay 600 life points, 1 face-up monster on your opponent's field loses 600 defense to the end of the turn. This effect is not super relevant, but does come up occasionally against Yami Ruler. Now, Yami Ruler has been slipping in popularity, and therefore we haven't been seeing it a ton, so this card sees less play, but it is still the best fire attribute spellcaster monster we have, so it's going to make the cut either way. Next up, Mystic Dealer. Send a spellcaster from your hand to the graveyard, draw a card. Again, we are playing a lot of spellcasters. It is a water monster, which means it does facilitate our 7's Road Magician, so it's made the cut. Then we have our 3 Grace Princess Kana. Again, 1400 defense can be useful. Dark Sorcerer, 1500 attack is obviously very hard to come by in this deck. This is the only monster we can run that is a 1500 attack monster, so we're going to be playing it. If we could play more, we would. Then we have our Earth Spellcaster of choice, Doriado. 1200 attack, 1400 defense is really good. And then finally, just our kind of wind monster that's just kind of thrown in is our Spell Archer. Now, we've gone for this over Torna because Torna can brick quite a lot. And although you can use Torna to get to your opponent's life points, if you're in a situation where you're struggling to kill your opponent, Torna doesn't really help you resolve that issue unless you get like specifically a Torna 7's Road Magician combo, but we just don't like running that many high level monsters because we do tend to brick on them. So I prefer Spell Archer just because we can just throw it out as a normal summon and tribute it off. And then finally, Recovery Force. Always going to be a really good card. The best way to use this, obviously, to set it. Wait until you have plenty of other cards, flip it over, and get an extra card so you have 6 cards to work with during your turn. So where does this deck kind of fall power level wise? It is quite weak. So this deck overall, I would say, is probably one of the weaker playable decks in the game. Like, this is a little bit above like meme deck, but it is not really super tournament competitive, is going to be winning anything deck. It's fine, and it can be very, very fun. The one way that this deck actually does get to stand out is if you end up in a stalemate situation where you and your opponent are just passing until you get your full combo. This deck is actually really, really good at killing your opponent when you have more than 5 cards to work with. For example, if you're able to summon multiple Lightning Voltcondor, get both of their effects off, effectively making your opponent's monsters attack 0, you can then go into double 7's Road or double Darkness Crested Hawk, boost your attack to that over 6,000 combined, and then just get in and kill your opponent, which is actually something this deck is very, very good at, and actually happened to me in a tournament I was playing. I was playing SAR Spellcasters, which again wants your opponent to go aggressive and then you counter-attack a lot like this deck. My opponent was playing Voltcondor. We both just kept setting monsters and then just kept drawing, until eventually I got to the point where I could do as much damage as I could with double Torna and double 7's Road. We didn't quite have enough to end the game, and then my opponent just did full combo with their Lightning Voltcondor and completely blew me out. And it was then that I realized that if this deck gets access to more than 5 cards, it can be really scary. The problem is, you won't get into that situation very often, but in one of the replays coming up, you will get to see that in action. Another thing to take note of is that this deck is pretty good into Dragius, because Voltcondor and Crested Hawk do naturally kind of out Dragius. It is a light monster, which means we can just weaken it with Lightning Voltcondor, and we can get a boost off of Darkness Crested Hawk. Also, on the offense, this deck is quite powerful because our attack can get quite high, 3100 attack on Darkness Crested Hawk, 39 on 7's Road Magician. Obviously, Lightning Voltcondor doesn't gain attack, but it can lower your opponents. So it does have ways to deal with any threat. The problem is on the crackback, it's always going to get beaten up. We also are unable to run Dragoncaster of our own, which is the best card in the game, which means we sometimes will struggle to get to our opponent's life points if they're just playing defensive as well. So yeah, this is the deck. Overall, fun, not super competitive, could use a little bit of a buff. I think basically we're going to need some new like Wing Beast support, which maybe we'll get in the mini box. But anyway, let's fire in some replays so I can show what I've been talking about.